Are you curious about the Legend of Zelda series but don't know where to start? It can be a little intimidating to figure out which game to play with 16 mainline games across 35 years. In this video, I'm going to detail which are the best Zelda games to start with, whether you're a gamer or someone who's never played video games. So let's get started. Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Ryan here from Game Essays. This channel is all about covering some of my favorite video game series, including The Legend of Zelda and Pokemon. So if that sounds like content that might interest you, please make sure to both like this video and hit that subscribe button. So getting into today's topic, I am recommending which are the best Zelda games to start with, whether you are someone who's never played video games or very little video games, or longtime gamers who just haven't really touched the Zelda series. Of course, this is also for longtime Legend of Zelda fans who just want to know the games I picked. Let's be real here. First things first is Breath of the Wild is not going to be in my primary recommendations just because it is the starting point for a new direction for The Legend of Zelda. The sequel to Breath of the Wild coming out in hopefully 2022 is going to be similar to that game. So if you are interested in the new direction of The Legend of Zelda, definitely play that game. But this video is for people who maybe want to look at the old backlog of all the other previous Zelda games and where to start with those types of games. So I've divided this into two categories, the 2D games and the 3D games. I especially recommend the 2D games for people who are brand new to video games or have very little video game experience. That might surprise some people because people might think the 3D Zelda games are a little bit easier. But I would say for someone who hasn't played a lot of video games, sometimes interacting in a 3D space can be a little intimidating, and I think the 2D games are a great place to start just because it will give you a great feel for the Zelda style in a sort of easier to navigate environment. Now, my first recommendation for the 2D games is going to be The Legend of Zelda, the Minish Cap. Now, this game was originally released for the Game Boy Advance, so it can be a little tricky to track down a Game Boy Advance nowadays and track down a cartridge of the game because if you want to play an authentic cartridge of the Minish Cap, it can be a little bit pricey. But the great news is the best way to play this is on the Wii U Virtual Console. And the Wii U in general is actually one of the better machines to easily access many Zelda games. So my recommendation for the legal way to play the Minish Cap would be to pick up a Wii U and download it on the Virtual Console before they eventually shut down that Virtual Console. Of course, there are other ways to access The Legend of Zelda the Minish Cap, but you won't find me telling you how to do that. You can go do your own research and figure that out. Now, why am I recommending The Legend of Zelda the Minish Cap? I just think it is a great beginner Zelda game. It has a pretty welcoming intro. I think it's it's on the easier side. I'm just going to say it straight up. It has a nice, fun art style. It is a very simple and easy to understand story. And it's on the shorter side, so it's not going to drag on too long that someone's going to give up with this game. I think it is, a nice, short, fun Zelda game, not too intimidating, and I just think it's a really great place to begin. People like to get into the whole, canon and story of all the Zelda games, and I want to kind of put all that to the side, the whole timeline stuff, as much as I love to talk about it. Don't worry about any of that. Don't worry about, figuring out the greater story of The Legend of Zelda. Just play the Minish Cap. It's a great game to just learn how, traditional Zelda dungeons work. There's only, there's maybe 6 or 7 dungeons in the whole game. So like I said, it's on the shorter side. It's a very enjoyable game. And each Zelda game has its own unique little mechanic or gimmick to it. In The Legend of Zelda the Minish Cap, it is sort of Legend of Zelda's Honey, I Shrunk the Kids type of situation. Link can shrink down to what is known as Minish size, where there are these little people known as the Minish, and they have their whole civilization, and you sometimes do dungeons entirely in Minish form, but you get to meet all these little Minish people that live in other people's houses up in the attics and stuff like that. It's really, really cool and a very charming game. So I think that is one of the best 2D games to start. Now, the other 2D game that I would recommend is much more accessible in my opinion, and that is The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds. Now, this can be easily picked up for the Nintendo 3DS for a pretty much retail price or less. They discontinued the 3DS, but I think it's still new enough, or still recent enough, I should say, that it's not too hard to track down copies of this game because they've made millions of copies of this game, and it's not too expensive to pick up a used 3DS, or even you can probably still find some new 3DSs hanging around. Whatever you want to do, any model of the 3DS or the 2DS is perfectly acceptable for playing this game. But A Link Between Worlds is a fantastic game. It is inspired by a game you might have heard of known as A Link to the Past. Now, the unique gimmick of A Link Between Worlds is that you have the ability to go inside of certain walls to solve puzzles. So you'll kind of walk along a wall. It's very, very cool and amazing for solving puzzles. The concept of Link Between Worlds is pretty close to the traditional Zelda style of going to dungeons and solving them throughout the game. What's different is normally in Zelda games, you'll get a unique item in a dungeon, and then you'll use that unique item to solve the rest of the dungeon. In A Link Between Worlds, they change things up a little bit, in that certain items are not as required, I would say. You can go to a shop and pick whichever items you want to use for these dungeons. It's not the case with all of them, but nevertheless, it gives you a little bit of freedom in not only what items you want to use in dungeons, but also what order you want to do the dungeons. Now, that might be a little intimidating having that much choice for a new player, but I do think it's handled in a very user-friendly way. And I do think the dungeons are, for the most part, there's a lot of thinking involved, but I don't think any of the dungeons are overwhelming or way too intimidating for new players. So that would definitely be my second recommendation for new players on the 2D space. Now, for 3D games, I would obviously recommend 3D games to people who are longtime gamers that just have not given the Zelda series a chance yet. So for those veteran gamers, maybe you've been playing Xbox or PlayStation most of your life, just growing up with those systems, and you haven't really focused on Nintendo, and you want to get into Zelda now. I would say that 3D games are the way to go because you're already used to them, and it might immerse you more than the 2D games off the bat. But hey, if you love the style of the 3D games and then you play through them all, I would say, hey, go check out the 2D games as well. Now, the first recommendation for the 3D games that I would say is The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. Again, the best way to play this one is on the Wii U. There is an HD remaster. It's a little bit pricey for a physical copy. I want to say it's probably around $80 now, which is definitely pricey, but I do believe you can just download it from the Virtual Console for, I think, $50, correct? $50 or $60, I'm not sure which. So that's probably, if you don't care about collecting games like me, where I always want the physical copy, if that doesn't matter to you and you're okay with digital, then I would say go get the digital version. Now, the reason I'm recommending Twilight Princess as the first 3D game is I do think it is on the easier side, that I think it's user-friendly. People might ask, why not the recently released Skyward Sword HD? I do think Skyward Sword's a decent Zelda game, not to get into it too much, but I don't think it's a great game to hook people into the series. I could be wrong there, but that's my personal feelings. Twilight Princess, I think, started a whole new generation of Zelda fans, and I think it is a fantastic place to start because it's not too old, but it's not too new either, that I think it has a lot of what people really liked about kind of the old and new styles of Zelda. But Twilight Princess, I think, hands down, has just one of the best dungeon experiences in any Zelda game, and that's the main reason I'm recommending it. On top of, like I said, it's more beginner friendly than some of the other Zelda games. And so if you don't like the dungeon experience in Twilight Princess, you're probably just not going to like Zelda dungeons at the end of the day. And I think the dungeons are like the core of what makes many Zelda games really good. And Twilight Princess, I think, is just one of the best examples of that. So if you want to really know, hey, is Zelda my thing? I think Twilight Princess is one of those games. Now, the intro to the game is a little slow, and you just have to give the game time. It probably has one of the worst beginnings of, I should say not the worst, but one of the slowest beginnings to any Zelda game. So maybe if you're like a JRPG fan, that may not bother you, but for other people who are used to just getting right into the action, you got to give this game a little bit of time, but it does pick up, I promise you. The main gimmick of this game is that you turn into a wolf. So you kind of have your mode as a wolf and your mode as Link. At the beginning, these are designated kind of sections of the game where you are as the wolf or you are as Link. But then eventually it does open up that you can transform to, back and forth between regular Link and as the wolf as you see fit. So that makes the experience a lot better. So don't be worried that you're going to be stuck in designated sections every time. I mean, obviously there's going to be puzzles you need to solve as the wolf and some you need to solve as Link. But once you have the freedom to move back and forth, the game gets even more fun to play. So Twilight Princess is probably my number one recommendation for people new to Zelda that want to play a 3D game. Now, my second recommendation for a Zelda game is Ocarina of Time 3D. Again, this is pretty accessible. It is on the 3DS. It's not too expensive to just go and find a copy somewhere of this game. It's very easy to find. And the reason I am recommending this game is that it, again, has one of the best dungeon experiences. It has one of the cooler mechanics of, going forward and backward through time. It's not way super confusing with puzzle solving and time manipulation. Don't worry about that. But you've probably heard this game. If you're watching this video, it's almost impossible for you to have not heard about Ocarina of Time. But it, even though this 3DS version is a kind of a remaster that cleans up some things, makes the graphics look better, improves upon the N64 version, some people do still see its age a little bit. So I think Twilight Princess I'm kind of putting ahead of it just because it just feels a little bit more new, and that's, for people who are new to games, they don't want to go back to something that feels a little bit on the older side, then I think Twilight Princess might be a little bit of a better fit. But you honestly cannot go wrong with Ocarina of Time. As old of a game as it is, it still holds up in many ways. And like I said, there are some very memorable dungeons. The music is incredible, and it's just one of the greatest games of all time. So why not give that one a shot to see, hey, do I like Zelda? Ocarina of Time is never a bad place to start. So those are my choices for places to start for new Zelda fans. I hope you guys found this video helpful, and if you do end up starting based on these recommendations, let me know what you thought of the game. Just leave a comment whenever you get to playing the game. Let me know. I'd love to hear about it. And for Zelda fans who just wanted to see what my picks are, let me know what you would have picked for both 2D and 3D Zelda games for people to start with. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoy what I find to be an incredible video game series that is absolutely my favorite series to play. And hey, get started and enjoy the world of Hyrule.